to escape Granny and her stern orders to behave like a well bred young gentleman, I looked for a place where I could hide, and I found it in an old banyan tree behind the house. Its large, spreading branches hung to the ground and took root again, and they were covered with thick green leaves. Here I was very well concealed, and I would sit propped up against the bole of the tree to read a comic or watch the world below on the road outside the compound wall. An English Sahib in a sun helmet, a Mem Sahib holding a colorful sun umbrella. Many European women had a horror of the Indian sun turning them so brown that they would be mistaken for an Indian born white. A lady in a sari with a basket of papayas balanced on her head. A man with a little hand drum and a monkey dressed in a red frilled dress and a baby's bonnet sitting on his shoulder. The banyan tree was populated with little animals, birds, and insects. The smaller leaves, still pink and almost translucent, would be visited by delicate butterflies, bushy tailed squirrels, and red headed parakeets. One day, climbing up the tree, I was startled by a giant yellow beak poised above my head. I backed away onto the closest branch, fearing an attack. I recognized the bird from my father's postage stamp, where it was strange but small and a resident of faraway Botswana or Kenya. I had not expected to run into it on a friendly banyan tree in Dehra, but the hornbill, relaxing in a great hole in the tree trunk, did not move and looked at me in a rather bored way, drowsily opening and shutting its eyes. After some time, I lost my fear and climbed past it in search of a comfortable branch. If Granny saw me when I had just emerged from my hideaway, I would be sent off for a bath. I had to learn to bathe myself. Gone were the soft hands of my Jamnagar Aya. Gone were the days of playing ructions in the bathtub with my father, or of lingering in the bath to float a paper boat or create soap bubbles. Into the hot water I went, no matter how hot, and out again in 2 minutes flat. If I took any longer, Granny would walk in grim faced, speaking not a word, and give me a good rough scrub down. And if the soap got in my eyes, well, then it served me right for not shutting them properly. Granny was a strong woman, and once in her grip, there was no escape. In a faded old photo, she appears to be a foot taller than grandfather, who stands possessively beside her, rather like a hunter who has trapped a large tiger or gorilla and brought it back alive. His first wife had been a boyar from South Africa who had trekked across the African veldt, braving Zulu spears and British bullets on separate occasions, finally ending up in India in a camp for Boer prisoners of war. Or so the story went. This first wife had been cousin Edith's grandmother. No wonder Edith was a tomboy a year older than me, bigger and heavier, and always spoiling for a fight. On one occasion, we had a wrestling match in the garden, flattening Granny's nostrums in the process. Being a boy, I was blamed for the damage, much to Edith's delight. I don't know what happened to her when she grew up. Most of our relatives left India before independence, and I was too young to try and keep in touch with them, even if I had wanted to. But if cousin Edith became a lady wrestler, I would not have been surprised. There was to be no respect from stern, dominating women. He is 6 years old, said grandmother. Time he went to school. I already know how to read and write, I protested. Daddy says I know more than boys who go to school. I did not like Granny's home very much, but it was still familiar territory. I did not want to go to a strange place, but Granny felt that I needed the discipline and character building that only a boarding school could provide. My mother did not disagree, and so I was incarcerated, the right word for the experience, in a small convent school at Hampton Court in Missouri, the convent of Jesus and Mary. My mother came to drop me off, and I kicked and screamed and made a terrible scene, but quietened down when I realized my tantrums was not going to make her change her mind. I hated that school from the first day, and I was still hating it a year and half later when I left. I was lonely, a misfit, unused to the company of hordes of shouting, screaming boys and girls, all of whom seemed unhappy. And the nuns were nothing like the soft and motherly Kerala nuns who are the most visible today. They were Irish and very straight laced, remote and unsympathetic. I suppose they made you tough, but whatever the merit of a no nonsense upbringing, no child benefits from the absence of affection, and there was none in that school. There was no imagination either. The nuns never told us, poor children, a story or sang a song that was not about service and suffering. The daily chapel services seemed endless, and I felt sickened by the glowing odors of frankincense and myrrh every Sunday when a visiting priest sermonized in Latin. Neither of my parents were overly religious. My mother had no interest in religion. My father was not an agnostic, but like most Church of England people, he was not fanatical about his faith. I was never taken to church every Sunday by my parents or even by Granny, and the only religious tract that had come my way, a proselytizing text called Little Henry and His Bearer, gifted by a distant aunt. I had not enjoyed reading it. But the nuns at the convent were determined to save our little souls. It is like that they put me off religion, and I have never missed the comforts of organized faith. I am an agnostic. You need something higher than religion, and I prefer trees and mountains. I'm not against religion. I'm not against anything really. To each his own. If their religious rituals make people happy, let them have it by all means. I'm just happy being a pagan. But I have digressed. To return to the nuns, I had started taking piano lessons inspired by the songs I had heard on our gramophone. The nun who was teaching me turned out to be a perfectionist who would cane me over the knuckles whenever I hit the wrong note, and that was the end of my interest in the piano. The food at the convent was awful. Bread and the cheapest available vegetable, usually pumpkin. The dormitory was overcrowded, the toilets at a distance. There were no books to read other than prayer books. How I longed for a comic. However, twice in a year we were taken to the pictures. Reverend Mother must have been a fan of Errol Flynn because we were taken to see two films featuring that swashbuckling hero. One was called They Died with Their Boots On, in which he played General Custer, who goes to war against the Red Indians and gets scalped for his trouble. The other was the charge of the Light Brigade, in which, as a British cavalryman, he takes on the Russian big guns and gets blown away. My boredom and restlessness at school were relieved by the arrival of colorful picture postcards from my father, who never failed to write to me. He would send me cards from Lawson Wood's Grand Pop series featuring an ape who attended parties, went up in hot balloons, and danced in the rain. Together with these postcards came messages from Daddy that there were books and toys waiting for me when I came home. And midway through that horrible year, he obtained a few days' leave and came up to see me. I stayed with him in a local boarding house, but I don't remember my mother coming up from Tehran to stay with us. He took me to the pictures. George Formby for a change. He was a funny man who played a ukulele, a sort of banjo, and bought me dozens of comics. I urged him to take me out of that wretched school and keep me with him. This he promised to do as soon as it could be arranged. My father made a couple of visits to Dehra after these holidays when I was back in the convent, and while I am not sure if he stayed in Granny's house, he and my mother did meet. I think the marriage was failing and they were trying to see if it could be saved. One day, I received a letter from my mother announcing the birth of my baby brother William in Dehradun. At the convent school, I finally made friends with a boy named Buster Jones who disliked the place as much as I did. Together, we made plans to run away, and to that end, we began saving up biscuits, slices of bread, rusks, and other edibles that could sustain us on our flight to freedom. These bits and pieces were hoarded away in our lockers, but were soon discovered, and as punishment, we were made to stand all day outside Reverend Mother's office. But we continued to make plans for our escape, although neither of us had any idea where we would go. My father was now being posted in different war sectors, and my winter holidays were once again spent in Dehradun under Granny's supervision. My mother was often out. She had felt stifled in Jamnagar with its limited social life, and she was happier in Dehradun, which was more cosmopolitan and lively. There were parties and picnics, and she would go to these with her friends. Sometimes she would also take me along. There were visits to the local cinema to see Eddie Cantor, my mother's favorite comedian, in Roman Scandals, and Laurel and Hardy, my favorite comedian, in Great Guns. There were picnics at Rajpur and a Christmas party and a birthday party for cousin Edith. Who would have thought there was a world war going on, or that the country was in the throes of the Quit India movement, and that the sun would soon be setting on the British Empire? Granny did not take much interest in parties and picnics, but Aunt Enid was a party and picnic person, and you could not keep her away from them. She had a friend, Mr. H, a local photographer and second hand car dealer. He came in a new car every other day and never seemed to have any work to do except arranging tickets for the latest movies and finding new places to visit for a bit of fun. Soon, Mr. H made friends with my mother, who was both younger and prettier than Aunt Enid. Mr. H used to take my family to sightseeings in and around the town. One afternoon, he took me and my mother for an outing. Soon, they seriously started discussing some matter of importance, and I was left to myself. Boredom set on me, and I left them sitting on the banks of the eastern canal and wandered off, finally making my way back home. I think I had expected my mother to be alarmed and come looking for me, but she had not noticed. When she returned late in the evening, she had nothing to say. Clement town on the outskirts of Tehran had been turned into a rest camp or recreation zone for British and American soldiers who had been on active service in Burma and the Eastern Front. A girl who lived down the road, V.R. Viola Melville, had great success announcing her engagement to a good looking young English corporal from the East End of London. The Melvilles were an affluent Anglo Indian family, not poor whites like the rest of us, and the marriage was a good affair, a well attended church ceremony followed by a grand reception at Tara Hall, the Melville family residence. I was appointed a page boy and was dressed up in my Sunday best, my duty being to fling handfuls of confetti on the young couple and the guests, something that I did with such gusto that the confetti soon ran out. V was a pretty girl, some 12 years older than me, always friendly and full of fun. Soon after marriage, she and her soldier husband left for their old Blighty, and I did not expect to see her again. Strangely enough, our paths were to cross several times in the years ahead in London, Delhi, and Dehradun. Over a year passed, and I was fretting for the company of my father. Picnics organized by local photographers or off duty soldiers were not sufficient distraction from the misery of the school where I was imprisoned for all but 3 or 4 months of the year. I am probably being unfair to my grandmother, who I am sure had a heart of gold. Her own children, 3 daughters, my mother being the youngest, 2 stepdaughters, one of them being in it, and a stepson, Ken, who lazed around doing nothing, had pretty well done in their own thing, so she could not have been very strict with them. Though it is likely that the late Mr. Clark, my grandfather, may have been the lenient one. From all accounts, he was a fairly easy-going person, although he was probably a bit helpless, saddled with 6 children. He was 68 years when he died, and by that time all his children were married, so he probably felt he had done his duty by them. For some mysterious reason, I never learnt why, Ken's marriage did not last very long. After the winter break, I was back at school, watched over by the unsmiling nuns. But events were moving swiftly down in the Doon Valley. News of Mr. H visiting my mother's home very often had reached my father in Delhi. In the middle of the school term, much to my surprise, I was taken out of the convent by my mother, and instead of taking me home, she took me straight to the Dehradun railway station. Where are we going? I asked her. Your father wants you to spend some time with him, she said. And I was put on the night train to Delhi with a small steel trunk. Someone must have accompanied me on the journey. I was barely 8 years old, but I can't remember my traveling companion. I only remember that I was met at the old Delhi railway station by my father, and that he was in his RAF, Royal Air Force summer uniform, khaki shirt, and knee length shorts, and a blue cap, already promoted to flying officer. He took me to the office of the station superintendent, Fred Clark, an uncle on my mother's side, who took us to his bungalow next to the station for breakfast. It was here that I gathered from the conversation over toast and tea that my parents had separated. My mother would stay on in Tehran with my baby brother William. I would be in the custody of my father, which pleased me, of course. And Ellen, the cross my parents had to bear, would be sent to live with our other granny, my father's 75-year-old mother in Calcutta. The life of a small child is dependent almost entirely on the lives of his or her parents. When a marriage breaks up, the children are often pulled in different directions and there is very little they can do about it. I had no quarrel with my mother, but I was drawn to my father instinctively. No one stood between us, no interloper, no rival for his affections. The bond formed during those early years in Jamnagar was as strong as ever and would only grow stronger in the coming months. A brief period that was probably the happiest of my childhood. Thank you very much.